I want to start with just a brief repeat of that reading from Hebrews. Make straight the paths of your feet, and what is lame may not be disjointed, but healed. I had a trip to the physical therapist yesterday. Not a big deal. The physical therapist found the spot with his thumb, and I think Duluth heard from me without the use of a telephone. It's not anything to worry about. It's just called having to sort of deal with some stuff. If you want to keep walking on a daily basis, you got to take care of yourself. I bring that up because our readings today, all the readings had that whole tone around physical well-being, spiritual well-being. So I want us to think a little bit about that in our life and how we tend to these things. I want us to go back to the gospel. We again have Jesus with the disciples on their way to Jerusalem, the followers of Christ. He's very aware of what is awaiting for him in terms of the civil as well as the religious authorities. He's very aware that his message of compassion and unconditional love has clearly become a major problem for those who do not believe in those values, both in terms of church leadership and civil. And so we have the followers of Christ who perhaps had some awareness that things are getting tense for this Jesus. His message has pushed the envelope beyond the comfort level for many. And so as they're walking along, they have questions that they want to ask. And more than that, they want answers. Jesus often does not give straight answers to questions posed to him. Today's gospel story, for instance, starts with somebody asking the very simple question, in some ways simple, will only a few people be saved? It seems like a rather simple, straightforward question. Somebody's crunching the numbers and wants to know who's getting in and who isn't. But Jesus perceives that the questioner and the others whom he was teaching were not really as concerned about the final head count as they were a little more concerned whether they themselves would be included among the redeemed. It's like any time you ask somebody who you know is having a party and you say, "Oh, you're having a party," translates oftentimes, "Am I invited?" That's clearly what we have here. Jesus' followers wanting to know if they're included. The first part of Jesus' answer is about what you must do first to position yourself for admission into the final gathering of the saved. I would well imagine you would lean in for the answer to that question. The person who posed the question, first of all, it's a good starting place. By asking the question, that person recognized that salvation is truly the work of God. It has actually little to do with what we bring to the process. Not that that's discounted. But God in her wisdom is the source of salvation. And that's an important starting place for most people. To be able to get out of our own way and recognize that God is God and we're not. The passive voice of the verb be saved implies that one does not save oneself. But the redeeming action is, as I said, truly done by God. That alone can be a stumbling block for any one of us who struggle with control issues. To be able to give it up to God, recognizing that it is God's work. And whatever we do is important, but it is not the defining answer. It's about a relationship. And sometimes those lines get a bit blurred when we're not certain and we like to perceive ourselves perhaps as God's understudy at best. Anytime anybody recognizes themselves or feels that quite likely they are the chosen one, perhaps the lines have gotten a bit blurred. Not that that's a bad concept, but you have to include every single man, woman, and child in that group of being the chosen. We are all chosen. Nobody got a head start. However, as Jesus' response makes clear, one must engage in rigorous training in order to be in condition to accept the gift of what it is to be saved, what it is to be whole. We have turned saving chairs here at Joan of Arc into an Olympic event. We are physically fit, and we are locked and loaded to save the chairs. It is an athletic event, particularly during high holy days. That has its own charm, more or less. The question I would have, what would it be if we were equally as tenacious about what it is for us to put a lot of energy into reassuring and reserving that spot in all of eternity, when a simple black chair at St. Joan of Arc will then be in your rearview mirror, no longer needed to be saved because you went on to bigger and better things. So for us as followers of Christ, to have the same passion around saving that spot in the hereafter as we do a simple black chair on a Sunday morning. The author makes an analogy between discipline, if you will, or the training that a child receives from a parent and the guidance that God provides us for deepening our spiritual life. We heard in Hebrews, "My child, do not disdain the discipline of the Lord, or lose heart. For whom the Lord loves is disciplined." The Greek noun here means not so much punishment, as in to be disciplined for a wrongdoing. Discipline has much more to do with training for life. What it is for us to be ever mindful of living a godly life. Some discipline consists in self-imposed chosen actions that indeed do strengthen the spirit and enable us to follow the path to faithfulness. Many in our communities, spiritual practices on a daily basis includes the fellowship of AA or Al-Anon. I'd have you think about your own spiritual practice that you choose on a daily basis. What you do with consistency to lift yourself out of the noise and the ridiculous messages that we live in day to day, to be reminded that you are not God, and it's important to dial in to God on a daily basis. So to develop a spiritual practice. There are other modes of life-shaping experiences that we do not purposely choose, but they clearly have a way of shaping our life. The ups and the downs of our life. Moments of great joy are phenomenal ways of shaping our spirituality. But we know so well moments of sadness, moments of hurt, both as individuals, as families that don't talk to each other. The pain of being a part of a larger church that so oftentimes doesn't get it right. The experience of what it is to be a citizen in a nation that oftentimes doesn't get it right. Those experiences in our life that we have no way necessarily of choosing or would choose, those also form our spiritual health. The author of Hebrews focuses on the latter kind of transformation. The writer speaks of how God, like a loving parent, can help us learn from the difficulties that befall us and guide us in how to become stronger through them. My niece and her wife had a baby a couple of years ago, last May. They now welcome their second child into the world, Zoe Grace, whom it was thought had physical challenges in the first trimester. We're then told, I think that scan was wrong. Everything looks good. The pregnancy continued, and Zoe Grace came into our life several months ago with many major physical challenges. We all want it perfect. We want a perfect life, and we'd love to have perfectly physically formed children. I've seen this transformation in my niece Joni and her wife as they now are parenting these two children, Zoe Grace giving them the challenge of their life with a lifetime of opportunities to love her so deeply. And she's teaching them a great deal. I hear and I feel so much from my niece, whom I've known her whole life, what they're learning from this sweet little peanut that they call her. So how do we embrace these times in our life that we were not planning on? In the author's worldview, everything that happens, both good or not so good, is caused by God. So the writer suggests that God imposes these trials and limitations on our life. That's very challenging for most people, to sort of go to that page that says this just has to be from God. Perhaps. God is with us at all times, so does that particular situation come from God? I'm not certain, but certainly God promises to be with us in whatever the experience. The writer's analogy of God as a loving parent, however, leads us also to think of God as never purposely inflicting suffering on us. That understanding, for me personally, makes far more sense. We don't have control over the journey, but we certainly know that God's with us every step. And so we struggle with the ageless question, one that many people ask: why do bad things happen to good people? That's a question that we ask loudly and boldly. There's a second most asked question that we tend to ask more under our breath, which is, why can't more bad things happen to people that we've decided are bad people? We tend not to be so bold in that question. At the end of the day, we will never have a clear answer. The end result can be affected by our willingness to embrace our spiritual gymnastic efforts. that can lead to a much greater sense of peace, a greater sense of joy, a greater sense of unconditional love. I'm told looking great on the outside has definite benefits and advantages. I would also suggest looking great, feeling great, and being beautiful on the inside has far more advantages for a much longer period of time, like eternity. In the gospel, Jesus speaks about what can happen to those who do not put any effort into working out spiritually. When the final moment comes, they will be, as was told, on the outside pleading to get in, thinking that just having been present to where Jesus taught, ate, hung out, shouldn't that be enough? We simply stood on the same ground that he did. Wouldn't that, you think, be enough? It would be sort of akin to packing your gym bag, going to the gym, finding the biggest, softest, cushiest chair, and sitting down and watching everybody go through their exercise program. Such a one is not known to be necessarily in the company of the athletes or prepared to make it to the finish line, which is what defines the narrow gate. And in fact, the writer goes on to say, sometimes it might feel even a bit too late to establish a workout program. So we have to pay attention to those moments in our life, those little sirens that go off that say we should pay closer attention. Similar to in late spring when you get out last summer's pair of shorts and you put them on and you wonder how could they have shrunk in that drawer all winter long. Most often that's not the case. That's a little buzz to let us think about what we're not doing in terms of our physical health. Jesus returns to the original question and, echoing the very first reading from Isaiah, envisions masses of people from all directions who will be included among the saved. As we say, and is said here, we welcome everyone wherever they are on their journey. That is God's vision, that is God's plan, that is God's heartfelt dream for all of humankind. God says to us, I have come to gather the nations of every language. Not a few languages, all languages. No nation, no leader of any nation has the right to declare that another nation is an S-hole nation. No leader who understands God's concept of bringing the world together would ever so fall short of their call in this life to be a compassionate leader when you single out any one person, any one nation, any one religion, and speak in a derogatory fashion. You have dropped your leadership like a handheld mic. The truth is, we all may be extremely surprised who gets to the finish line first. I think there'll be a great deal of surprise. So I leave each and every one of us with these three questions. Number one, of what does your daily spiritual workout consist? What do you do every day for at least 2.5 minutes that reminds you that you're not God, that you are loved by God, and that you have a destiny in this life? 2.5 minutes. Just take 2.5 minutes. Second question, being open to hearing and accepting what needs to be strengthened. Most of us have a pretty good sense about ourselves around what part of our spiritual well-being needs to be strengthened, to be kinder, more forgiving, whatever the case. Sometimes we can assess that on our own. Sometimes we get feedback, welcomed or unwelcomed, from others. Do we have the courage and the wisdom to shut up, to listen, to consider it, and take appropriate steps? Are we open to feedback? Third question, for you to think about how has God helped you form your spiritual life in what seemed like the lowest point in your life. What has been your response? Was it to wake up the next morning and play pretend that that's not the case? Did you flip off the switch to joy for the rest of your life? What do you do constructively with painful events in your life? Recognizing again that God is with us each and every step, all the way to the finish line. I invite you to please stand.